Okay, so this is a 99 Oldsmobile 88, model 88. 99 was the last year that they made this model of vehicle. And right now, this vehicle is not starting. It has a flashing security light on the dashboard, which means that the computer module is not reading the signal off of the key. And these models of cars, they have a chip in the key, and once the computer module can no longer read the key, the car's not going to start. It just sits there with a blinking security light. So what we have to do is we have to get into the dash and find the wires that are coming off the ignition where we can modify the system and enable the car to start. So what we have here, this is a GM car. This is a Passlock 2 key from a GM car, specifically an Oldsmobile 9988. Now, GM made different VAT systems, vehicle anti-theft systems, and they made the Passlock 1, the Passlock 2, and the Passlock 3. And all of them are, basically the same idea. However, they had different configurations. Sometimes they put the chip inside the handle here. In the Passlock 2 systems, they actually put the chip right there where you can see it in the key. So what we want to do is we want to configure a series of resistors to replicate this signal that's coming off this key and be able to get the car to start, get the fuel injectors, the fuel pump, and the necessary power that we need to get the car, to get the module to recognize the signal and get the car started. So, we need a few things to do this. We need some things you might have to buy. You might have some of them. Some of your friends might have some of this stuff around. You're going to need a multimeter. Now, this particular multimeter is a cheap multimeter you can get at Harbor Freight. You can buy it for, $6, $7 or $5 on sale a lot of times. But it will do the job. It will basically read the resistors. It'll read the key. And if you end up having to buy one, this is a good option. You want to spend as little money as possible, because what's happening is if you try and go to the dealer or get this problem fixed from a mechanic, they want to charge you a lot of money. The module costs hundreds of dollars. They want to charge you $100 just for another key, and then you're not really sure it's going to work, because most oftentimes the problem is in the steering column, where wires are broken or the contacts are not functioning properly, and the module cannot read the signal coming off the key. Sometimes the resistors in the key are failing, and so the module is not reading the right signal. Basically, what we want to do is we want to wire in resistors within the system so that the module can read them. Now, if you are trying to start your car and your car starts but then stops and then no longer wants to start, that's a separate issue. That's your module, and you're going to have to replace the module. You can get a aftermarket module or something of that nature. But this particular problem we're addressing here is the inability of the module to understand the signal coming off the key, and so we want to replicate that signal by wiring in some resistors. So some things you're going to need. You're going to need this particular, you're going to need a multimeter to read the signal off the key, and you're going to need to read the resistors so that you can understand the value that needs to come in so the module could see it. You're going to need a soldering iron of some type. This soldering iron, I like these. It has a very narrow tip. It's easy to solder electronics, but you don't need to have one that sophisticated. You can get just a cheap soldering iron you can buy at Walmart or Harbor Freight or your local hardware store. Not spend a lot of money on it. You're going to need some solder. Solder comes in a lot of different ways. This particular solder is used for electronics. It costs a little more, but you can just buy some cheap solder, because you're only going to use a tiny bit, and it doesn't matter. You just want to get this going. You're going to need some, this is a package. These are different diameters of heat shrink or shrink wrap. Heat shrink or shrink wrap. Basically, it's the same concept. you're sliding this over the resistors, and maybe you have to slice it to fit it over there or whatever, but when the time comes, you heat it with a flame, and it shrinks down and covers the contacts, so it doesn't come in contact with any of the other metal within your car and short anything out. The idea is to protect this little bypass that you're going to make. These are butt connectors. It's easy to take a butt connector and slide wires into one end and crimp it, slide the contact from the resistor in the other and crimp it. Just makes it easier, and then you don't have to worry about anything happening. Just make sure it's solid, a good solid contact, and you're not going to have any problems with it anymore. So these are some of the things you're going to need, and then once you get all this, these things together, you can get this stuff cheap. You can see if your friends have any of it. Maybe a friend has a soldering iron and some solder. Another friend might have a multimeter. Some people might have some of these butt connectors. You never know, but you can buy them cheap at a hardware store anyway. So this is the kind of stuff you're going to need. And then from here, I'm going to show you exactly how to put this stuff together and get the reading you need and get your car started. For $8, you can get a whole package of resistors, and it'll tell you on the box all kinds of things about the resistors. And basically what you're going to have to do is measure your key, and then you're going to have to assemble the resistors in the sequence that will give you the same kind of reading that your key has. So what I'm going to do now is set up the key to read it very quickly to give you an idea about how to do this. Okay, so basically what I'm doing is I've set up this key so that I can take a reading off of it, and I've set my multimeter on ohms. On this particular multimeter, I've set it on 2,000 ohms. Depending on how high the chip is in your key, you might have to set it higher to get a reading, but in this particular case, 2,000 ohms is going to read it. Now, you might have seen that you need to put your key in a vise or something of that nature, but this is just a pair of vice grips where I have the key sitting so that I can put the probe on either side of it. Actually, you could actually just take a pair of pliers and a rubber band and achieve the same thing. Just put the key in there and put it down so that you can get the reading on the key. Now, I just put a probe on either side of the chip, and it reads a value. That's basically going to be the value of my key. It's saying 823, 822 right in there. And so the idea is that now I'm going to have to get resistors that match that particular reading, which is not a problem. What you do then is you take your resistors and you read the values of the resistors with the same probe, and then you're going to come up with a series of resistors that will match the output of the key. Now, what has happened is that the contacts inside the steering column, for whatever reason, are no longer able to pick up the signal and pass it on to the module. Now, what I've done is I've taken two resistors that match the basic configuration, and the way you do that is you get the package of resistors and you measure them until you find the value, and then you match the value with that your key is reading. So I'm going to put one end on this and one end on this one. What I've done is solder them together, and so I've got a reading of resistors of about 844 ohms, but with a 10% tolerance, this is close enough so that the module in your car is going to read it. And basically all I've done is solder them together, and this is not that easy to do if you're just trying to lay it down on the counter. So a good idea is to take each end of the resistor, and sometimes you might have to use 3 of them or whatever, but you just find 2 books and stick the ends in pages of the book on either side, and so that they're matching, and then get a soldering iron and put some solder on it and solder them together. You know, you don't need special devices. You can find stuff around your house to be able to accomplish this, all of these things that you need to do. And you can go online and look at resistor values, because these resistors are color coded. You can see right there the colors, and the colors have the values, but you can also just read it with the multimeter, and it'll tell you that there's a certain resistance going on with that particular resistor. I'm just measuring one side of it. It's 660, and then I can measure the other side of this other resistor, and it's 180, and together they are coming up with, I'll get either side of them, around 840, a little bit higher maybe, but as long as you're within the 10% of the key that we were measuring here, then it's going to be close enough. So you can see how that works. Now the next step is to find where you're going to insert this resistor in your car, and that's a little bit harder. We're going to talk about that right now. Because we have to get in, and we're going to have to take apart the dash. In order to do that, you have to take some of these pieces off. You have to take this trim piece off right here, this kind of fake wood piece. It actually pops out with a screwdriver. You have to pull your steering wheel down and pry it out, pull it back. Then what you're going to have to do is get under the dash. This piece of dash on this side comes out. You have to unbolt it, unbolt the panel down here, unbolt it on the sides and on the bottom, and then you're able to pull this piece down, and you'll see the wires that are coming off the ignition on the top of the steering column. Then you have to locate the wires, and what we're going to do is we're going to splice in some resistors that replicate the signal coming off the key, and then the car is going to start. The wiring, in order to get to it and actually work with it, I had to remove part of the dash panel. That in and of itself is not an easy task, and this is the reason why they charge you a lot of money to try and fix this problem. You don't actually have to remove this panel like I have. You can go underneath and just take off the bottom panel and then reach up under there. Basically you have to almost stand on your head to do it that way. So I've removed this particular part of the dash next to the steering column. Now all these wires are coming out of the steering column right here. And so what you have to do is locate the wires that actually go into the ignition. And this model, it's this orange wire sheath, and there's just 2 white wires coming out. A lot of the information you see show that there's different colored wires or whatever, but there's only 2 wires that come out of this that are not part of a harness. One of them is the yellow airbag wire, and so you know it's a good idea to disconnect the yellow airbag wire. It comes to a connector that looks like this. Then you don't have to worry about your airbag popping or causing you any problems. But this other wire is the only other single wire that actually comes out of the steering column, and it goes into a panel block up here. So it doesn't actually go to a connector. A lot of the information you see says that you're looking for a wire that goes to a connector, and this doesn't. It goes up in here into this block, but it is the only other single wire And you can see these are very thin wires that we're going to attach this to. Now, what I've done is I've taken the two resistors and I put shrink wrap on them and a connector, these butt connectors, so you can just crimp wires on there. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to wire this particular configuration across the wires. That will give me the resistance. I'm going to connect these wires back together with this resistor wired in between, and that will give me the resistance needed for the module to actually read what it needs to see in order to allow the security system to start the car. What's happening is when you put the key in the ignition here, right here, this is no longer able to read the chip on the key for whatever reason. The wires have gone bad, the contacts are dirty. Removing this steering column is a lot harder than doing this process that we're doing here. I'll be able to rewire this and put this back together in a much shorter period of time than it would take to dismantle this steering column and pull all this off, pull the airbag out and get a steering wheel puller and all of that. And even then you have a smaller area to work in. This right here enables me to get under here, splice these wires together, and then get this car running. So I'm going to splice these wires in and then I'll get back. So basically what I've done here is I've just taken the two sides of the orange wires and I've connected them back together, but with the resistor unit that I put together. And what you see is white shrink wrap that I put over resistors so that it won't come into contact with other wires. There's a little piece of wire here that I still need to tape up, but basically what I've done is replicate the signal coming off the key down in the wire itself that leads to the module. So this being the case, before I did this, all I had was a blinking security light and my car wouldn't start. And so now we're going to check this out. I've got the key in the ignition and let's take a look at what happens here. Security light went out. Battery's dead. So basically I've run my car out of power trying to deal with the problem, and so now I got some jumper cables hooked up to it. As you can see here, there's the security light. It's not blinking anymore. There it goes out. Car starts right up. So this is after I've taken and put the resistors that I showed you earlier in line with the orange wire. In this particular model, Oldsmobile, it's a 99, year 99, model 88. It's the orange wire coming off the column up to that block of wires there. In order to do this, I had to remove this panel here and pull it down, disconnect some of the different pieces. This actually goes to the trunk. And so at this point you have to reassemble everything. This takes some time and a little bit of mechanical know-how, but it's far cheaper than taking it to a dealer and having them charge you for a key or try to install another module for hundreds and hundreds of dollars. This only costs maybe $20 total, even if you have to buy a soldering iron. So now my car's running, and that's how you do it.